The Roman Empire transformed under the reign of Constantine I. Emperor Constantine was determined to create a unique, identifiable self-image to illustrate his glory. Through manipulation of his portrait, Emperor Constantine I was able to push an image of himself with characteristics associated with power and success. Many portraits from the reign of Emperor Constantine still exist today in various forms. We see images of the emperor on gold and silver coins, along with bronze and marble statues. These portraits of Constantine would transform throughout his rule, taking on new characteristics as the years progressed. Each of these portraits had one prevailing trait. Constantine I was trying to create a curated public image of himself. Emperor Constantine wanted his portrait to be recognizably his, and we will be focusing on one of the most interesting pieces we still have today. The marble portrait head of Emperor Constantine I is on display at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. The art piece is said to be from Rome and was in the Giustiniani collection from before 1631 until 1902, when Mary Clark Thompson purchased the piece from the family. The marble portrait head was bequeathed to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in 1926, where it remains on display today. The sculpture is believed to be from the end of Emperor Constantine's reign, or around 325 to 370 CE. The head is completely made out of marble, measuring at 37.5 inches tall, 23 inches wide, 26.5 inches deep, and weighs in around 1,100 pounds. Only the head remains today, but it is believed it was originally accompanied by a bust or even a full body. If this were the case, the sculpture would have stood about 16 feet tall. Discrepancies in the piece leave the impression that this portrait was a rework of a previous emperor's sculpture. The details around the hair and ears cause historians to believe this was possibly a past portrait of the Emperor Trajan. Emperors' portraits were a prominent piece of Roman culture. Large portraits and statues could be found around the empire at temples, villas, public buildings, on streets, and even at people's homes. Smaller portraits of the emperor could be found on personal items as well, like buttons, cups, rings, and soldiers' weapons. These portraits were placed at the discretion of local councils, but the emperor styled his image with deliberate intentions. Imperial portraits were illustrated to convey a message about the emperor. Emperors manipulated their personal image to be recognizable as themselves through unique features. By choosing specific hairstyles, clothing, facial expressions, and facial features, emperors could set themselves apart from the directly preceding rulers and could associate themselves with powerful rulers from the past. Constantine I came into power as a tetrarch following his father's death in 307 CE and became the sole emperor of Rome in 324 CE. His father, Constantius I's, portraits differ greatly from Constantine's. The hooked nose is considered to be a family trait, something we see in both emperors' portraits. However, Constantius I's portrait is modeled after the militaristic style which had been popular for almost 2 centuries and was inspired by the portraits of Caracalla. They typically included a beard, short hair, and an intense expression. Constantine chose to model his portraits more after emperors like Augustus and Trajan, with a clean-shaven face, longer hair over the forehead, and a calm expression, really emphasizing youthfulness. By shifting away from the style of portrait that had been popular for centuries, Emperor Constantine was separating himself from the prior emperors while associating himself with the emperors remembered for their success. Constantine I was one of the last Roman emperors to have such a recognizable portrait. His sons did not follow in his path, and historians today struggle to differentiate their portraits from one another. The marble portrait head of Constantine I is exceptional as it encompasses all the features Constantine added to his portrait throughout his reign to make it unique. The large, upward-gazing eyes symbolize the close relationship between himself and God, and became prominent in portraits during the end of his reign. This portrait feature was originally used by Alexander the Great to allude to his kingship being divinely guided. The larger, hooked nose and prominent chin were traits recognizable as Constantine I, while connecting him to his familial lines. The smooth, hairless face made his portrait stand out against his father's and other rulers' bearded, stubbled faces from the previous decades. He wanted to stand out, but he still wanted to resemble Augustus's power through the lack of facial hair and hair lying across his forehead. This marble head shows how Emperor Constantine was able to develop a unique portrait for himself during his reign by shifting away from what was popular and taking on traits associated with some of the most celebrated rulers. Constantine utilized his portrait and self-image more than any other emperor, and because of that, historians today are able to identify his portraits based on the traits he chose to display. Emperor Constantine I was able to create a unique, identifiable self-image and was able to push a successful, powerful portrait of himself.